At the end of the Gospel of this day, we have these somewhat sobering words. The king says to the guest who has no wedding garment, "How did you get in here, my friend, without a wedding garment?" And the man was silent. There is a passage in the testimony of Father Stephen Shire, who had a clinical death, and he was before the great king, and his life was being shown him, and each time all he could say was yes, yes, yes. He was silent, and at that point he had no defense. Then the king said to the attendants, "Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the dark. There will be weeping and grinding of teeth." The Hebrew is always concrete. Concepts are expressed in heavy, realistic terms. Grinding of teeth. The outer darkness. What does it mean? I was quite moved finding again these words, which years ago I had translated from the French in solitude, about this outer darkness, this place, wherever it may be, and its nature. And it's worth hearing again some of this, for after all, we have no power to change the cosmos. It was there before us. The nun on this side of time says to the other, wanting to know more, "Where is purgatory situated? Is it in a confined place?" And the answer comes back, "It is in the center of the earth, near hell, as you saw it one day after Holy Communion. The souls there are in a confined space in comparison with the huge number to be found in it, because there are thousands upon thousands of souls there. But how much room does a soul take? Every day, several thousands come in, and the best part are there for 30 or 40 years. Some considerably longer, others less. All this I'm telling you in earthly terms of reckoning, because where we are, it's all different. Ah, if people only knew, if they but had some idea of what purgatory is. And when you think that it's through your own fault that you're there. I've been here for 8 years. It seems as though 10,000 years had gone by. On it goes. And still there is more information coming back. At another point in the manuscript, this comes through. She asks, "How far is it from the world in which we live to purgatory?" This question of distance is interesting, for one can ask, does geography enter into it when we're in the realm of the soul? the answer seems to be that there is movement, and those who have a clinical death do talk about going down a tunnel. Therefore there's movement from where the body was to somewhere else. And the answer comes back. Purgatory is in the center of the globe. Isn't the world itself a purgatory? And she goes on, of those who live in it, some do it entirely while still there, through voluntary or accepted penance. These go after death immediately to heaven. Others begin it there, because the world is a veritable place of suffering. But these souls, lacking as they are in the generosity which is needed, will have to finish off their earthly purgatory in the real one. And then the question of deaths, those that are sudden. Deaths that are sudden and unforeseen, are they acts of God's justice or of his mercy? The answer comes back. Deaths of this sort are sometimes an act of justice and sometimes an act of mercy. When a soul is of a worrying nature, and God knows that it is prepared and ready to appear before him, in order to spare it the frights it might have at the final moment, he withdraws it from this world by a sudden death. And at other times, God takes souls away in his justice. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are utterly lost, but deprived as they are of the last sacraments, or having received them hastily, without having prepared themselves for the last crossing, their purgatory is considerably more painful and goes on for a longer time. Others, having reached the very limit with their crimes and remained deaf to every single God-given grace, are removed from the world. God takes them off lest they excite his vengeance even further. And that comes through also in the Hell manuscript, that when souls are in a state of utter refusal of grace, it's a mercy that actually they die before they make their hell even worse. For there are degrees also in that place. And then the question of the nature of purgatory itself. The fire of purgatory, is it a fire like the one we know on earth? And here's the answer. Yes, only with the difference that the fire of purgatory is a purifier that has to do with the justice of God. And that of the earth, nice and gentle compared with purgatory. It's but a shadow beside the great braziers of divine justice. When we hear language like this, we are reminded how clever the enemy of the soul and of mankind is. All he wants is to swell the ranks of his citizens with him in his rotten kingdom. And so he can use whatever works. It would seem that one of the best means he has is that of giving a message which will in some way numb the voice of their conscience. As long as it works, he'll use it. And so we have to be careful not in any way to collude with him by giving souls, immortal souls, an idea that whatever they do, they will get there. It's an abuse of the message of mercy. We have always to hold mercy in its context. There is no mercy if there is nothing to be merciful from, that is, justice. And to remove from the scene the whole question of justice and order is to make of our God something quite anodyne, sugary, harmless. It's dangerous. We can't change God. We can't change truth. We can't take away from God his right to judge. We do not judge. And by thinking that we can sway things in such a way that we give a new message never there before, we are playing the game of the great brain that engineered hell. But how on earth can a soul burn anyway, she asks. And the answer, by a just permission of God. The soul, that is, the guilty partner, since all the body did was obey. And what malice do you ever see shown to a dead body? The soul suffers as though it were the body that suffered. What takes place during the last agony, she asks, and in the time that follows? Does the soul find itself in the light or in darkness? Under what form is the sentence pronounced? And the answer comes back. I had no agony, as you know, but I'm able to tell you that at this last decisive moment, the devil lets out all his fury on the dying. In order to give souls greater merit, God allows them to undergo these last hours of testing, these last battles. Strong and generous souls, so that they may have a yet more glorious place in heaven, often have, at life's end and during the pangs of death, a taste of these terrible fights against the angel of darkness. You yourself have been a witness to the fact. But they come through it victoriously. God doesn't allow a soul who has been faithful to him throughout her life to be lost in these final moments. Those who have loved the Blessed Virgin, who have invoked her all through their lives, receive many graces from her during the last struggles. The same is true of those who have been devoted to St. Joseph, St. Michael, or some other saint. It is then, as I've said to you already, that one is glad to have an intercessor before God in this painful moment. There are souls who die in peace without experiencing anything of what I've just described. The good Lord has his designs in everything. He does or permits everything for the particular good of each. Then the one in purgatory goes on. How am I to tell you and describe to you what takes place after the agony? It isn't possible to understand it properly without having gone through it. I'll try nevertheless to explain it to you as best I can. The soul, as it leaves its body, has a feeling of being utterly bewildered, completely besieged, if I may so speak, by God. It finds itself in such lucidity that in the twinkling of an eye it perceives its whole life, and in accordance with what it sees, what it deserves. It's the soul itself that in the midst of such a clear light pronounces its own sentence. It does not see God, but is annihilated by his presence. If it is a guilty soul, as was my own case, and in consequence has merited purgatory, it is so crushed down by the weight of its faults still remaining to be effaced, that it plunges itself of its own accord into purgatory. It is then, and then only, that one understands God, his love for souls, and how wretched sin is in the eyes of his divine majesty. Now, this element of the ugliness of sin is to be taken seriously. A person who sins is loved by God, and God wants the good of that person. It is a misunderstanding of Christian charity and mercy and pastoral zeal to give the impression that that person can carry on where he is and be saved. What has the Church to offer if it capitulates before the world, giving it the message it wants to hear? It's become part of the world, and it is a black house, not a lighthouse in the ocean. We mustn't lead souls into shipwreck. So sin is ugly, and the soul is made to be beautiful. It mustn't be left in its ugliness. After all, the Lord, when talking to that lady who was caught in adultery, did at the end say to go and sin no more. St. Michael says the soul in purgatory is there when the soul leaves the body. It is him alone that I saw, and that all souls see. He is, as it were, the witness and the executioner of divine justice. I also saw my guardian angel. All this is to help you to understand how it is that it can be said that St. Michael carries our souls to purgatory. Because a soul can't be carried, yet nonetheless it's true, inasmuch as he is there, present at the execution of the sentence. All that goes on in the other world is a mystery for yours. And then finally, and when it's a soul that is to go straight to heaven, says the soul on this side, the answer comes back, for this soul, its union with Jesus just goes on at death. That's what heaven is. But heaven's union is far more intimate than earth's. And so we see that the game is, how do we use time? We do well to reflect on that. For one thing that does come through in the Purgatory manuscript is that souls on the other side appreciate for the first time what time was, how each second should have been spent well in consideration of the time that never stops. As someone said, we're dead a long time. And so it's worth taking seriously these gospel hints that the risk is there. I once saw a billboard. It was in front of a chapel. It had on it, too much sugar preaching leads to truth decay.